Bike Shop Radio. This is Joe, and I'm here with my co-host Hope.
Hello, all.
And this is the podcast that emanates from a bike shop, but doesn't talk about bikes. So let's just jump right into it. Lists of things that I was thinking about talking about. A couple things, but the big thing is you have this huge historical piece coming out tomorrow about Hall and Oats, and maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because I've been wanting to access this and read this forever, and it's been in the works for so long. For good reason.
Yeah. This is like, as everybody would, maybe they know or don't know, I have a music blog, which is about things lost, old, and new, and also kind of trying to redress the balance in terms of things that, let's put it this way, things that people don't think are cool, to kind of push back on that, because I don't believe in the word cool. So this is kind of my personal fight back against being cool and all that stuff. So,
and you also don't
on
believe,
it I have a
you also
right.
don't
So
believe in the word. You also don't believe in guilty pleasure. Which is
guilty pleasure. Yeah, that expression doesn't exist in my life, because I believe in taking full ownership of who you are. I hate that. Oh man, every time somebody, and like I said, a lot of that was born out of working at a record store, where people would be embarrassed to tell you if they like things, and they would approach you very sheepishly. It's like, okay, and I've said this before, the first sentence out of someone's mouth when they would ask for a record, be like, I know this is lame, but, and I would always say, it's not lame if you like it. You can't help how you're wired. It's 100% okay. I mean, I think Dave Matthews Band is shit, but you know what? If they were the soundtrack of your life, I respect that. That's okay, because you can't help it. I've got plenty of things like that. I love Barry Manilow. And I'm not ashamed to say it. And I found too, like, even in my last job, being a punching bag for people coming up and saying, "Oh, that stuff's trash," and making fun of Paul McCartney to my face all the time, and George Michael and all these things. I loved it. I loved when people gave me crap about it, because it just kind of strengthened my desire to stick up for those sorts of things. So on the website, there's a thing called That's Their Pet Sounds, which is basically about a band, a maligned band, an uncool band, an uncool artist, or a more obscure artist's greatest album, the kind you don't see in the best albums of all time lists. And so I've written things about Rick Springfield and Barry Manilow in there, to kind of explain that they too have achieved artistic greatness at some point in their careers, because they freaking have. And anyway, so Hall and Oats, I love Hall and Oats. I call them a band. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. And like a lot of people, because I listened to them when I was growing up during my teenage and torture years and childhood torture years, I feel very strongly about them, like anybody does about all those bands that were there for them when they were teenagers. So I have like a long history of love. And I thought, shoot, I was reading last year, Taylor Swift gets a lot of attention. And if you're a music nerd, one of the things that's happened with her over the years is there are a lot of lists rating her best songs and her best albums. There are multiple lists. And I mean, literally every song. Here's all 172 Taylor Swift songs from really reputable publications like Rolling Stone and New York Magazine. Everybody's done this. There are so many of these. And I thought, shoot, I'd love to read a Hall and Oates one. At least of the albums, and I discovered that there really weren't any. So I use a quote from the legendary author Toni Morrison, who I am not comparing myself to her, everybody, just want you to know. One of her famous quotes is that, if there's a story, I'm paraphrasing here, if there's a story you want to read or something you want to see and it doesn't exist, then write it yourself. And so that's the tack I took. I was like, I'm going to write my own grading of all these Hall & Oates albums. And then it turned into something else, that's a huge part of it. But then I started to stick in kind of these anecdotes and about my relationship with them, hopefully not in an alienating way. This is not about me, but this is about some nerdy suburban girl who loved Hall and Oats, and just my experience with it growing up, and what it is in the context of pop music now, which I don't think they get enough respect.
Right, and your perspective is that's what I've always felt like. Your perspective, like when you grew up, where you grew up, how you grew up, and what you listened to, I always felt was a great music lens that very few people have out there in terms of like what you bring to like these discussions. That's what I always loved about having these podcasts, because and then working in the record stores, and then meeting Michael Jackson, and then all these every band, there's a story of meeting a person, and so your perspective is really unique.
Right, and I think that I would say that anybody in the whole world, like if they want to write something or whatever, that's how they have to kind of look at it. It's like, look, there's nobody like you. Nobody has your exact same voice and stuff like that. I would love if there were more writers that I could feel connected to, but traditionally it's a very male space, and you'll find that on a lot of the major music blogs, Pitchfork and Stereo Gum, and it's primarily white male writers of a certain age, and I love reading all that, but I don't feel me in any of it, i.e. female, older. So so I don't think, oh, I'm so special, but it's a different perspective, and I know for a fact there are people like me who have grown up with that stuff and related to it in the same manner, who grew up with MTV or my mission with it is to have people see that Hall & Oats, it's not really cheese. There's actually a lot more to it if you're willing to go deeper. And I know people roll their eyes at this because all they're thinking about is Maneater. It's just like, you know what? I'm telling you, it's so much more than Maneater. Don't let that be your gauge. It's just, I think that's such an unfair kind of assessment, and everyone's got their signature song. It's like, I love George Michael, but I can tell you right now that Careless Whisper and Last Christmas are the last songs I would ever play. We all have bands like that. I'm sure, like, if you look at like your favorite stuff, there's certain things you recognize.
I can't get through Shiny Happy People. Like, that's a really tough one.
Oh man, right. Perfect example.
I've got a great story once you're done with this about me and my daughter connecting with some really awesome music, and I think that my job as a parent is done. I've gotten there, but I want to hear more about the Hall & Oats thing, and then we'll talk about that because you'd be proud of me.
Go on.
What, are you going to finish the Hall & Oats?
Oh, wait, I thought you were going to tell the story.
I want to talk about more everybody. Hall & Oats stuff.
So anyway, they're in the middle of a tour right now. They're playing at the Garden tomorrow, which, whenever this gets broadcast. But so this piece is going to go up tomorrow early evening, and if anybody wants to read it, that would be great. It's a little unhinged, but I'm trying to make a case for them, and hopefully, and perhaps this is the other part. Maybe get a little more respect for that John Oates guy. I'm telling you, that guitar is plugged in, and I feel like he's been looked at as such a sixth finger, and I really, as a fan, I really feel the need. Oh yeah, I feel the need to, kind of stick up for him a little bit. Not the solo material, if anybody was going to get any crazy ideas.
So now it's so the website. It's going to be on your website tomorrow. Picking up.
Yeah, pickinguprocks.com, everybody, and everybody should take a look.
It corresponds with them appearing at Madison Square Garden tomorrow night. Is that also correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it a one-night show or is it a multiple?
They're doing a tour, and you know who's opening for them? Squeeze, which is super super weird. I know. It's like
my Squeeze stories. My Squeeze stories. I took my wife to see Squeeze maybe 8 or 9 years ago at Radio City Music Hall, and she fell asleep.
Oh.
We were sitting upstairs in the balcony, but she fell asleep, and I would not leave until they played Pulling Muscles as the encore.
But you know what? When you're at the Garden, and I saw Janet Jackson, I'm not even kidding, from the last row in the back, you might as well be at home. I mean, even the images on the screen were tiny. I was like, is there somebody up there? You really felt disengaged from what was happening.
Right.
And my Squeeze story too is like, they were so, I saw them at the Garden for I guess it was the first time, it was the late 80s. And it was so boring that I remember my friend and I, about 5 songs in, it's like, let's go for a walk. We literally just walked around the perimeter of the Garden about 10 times until the show was done. And you can, you'd occasionally poke your head in. It's like, oh, tempted. but the rest of it is like, damn. And it kind of, they fall into that category where it's like, I mean, I like New Order. I mean, I like them, but as far as a show, I found it kind of boring.
Yeah.
It's just a little too straightforward. It's just not enough to play songs. Sometimes I'm not saying people have to jump around like maniacs, but I just needed a little bit more.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I'm a casual fan. I can name 10 songs. They certainly played more than 10 songs. You know, there's stuff off the new album. There's deep cuts that I didn't really know. And yeah, it was.
Right.
It wasn't as if their music isn't incredibly like animating, or they as musicians weren't, you know, jumping around like Flea. So it kind of the overarching is just like these guys playing these songs and just playing the next song and kind of standing there, and that's where the bass guy stands, and that's where the guitar stands over there.
What you need, this is where the audience has to really show up. You know, like if a crowd is into it, that can make the show, and it can kind of lessen the load on the band. Yeah. But if the crowd is like, at Squeeze, it's going to be a lot of people sitting, looking. You know, you're not going to get a lot of that interaction. And I hope everyone doesn't get mad at me. I saw Bob Dylan recently. My friend invited me, and I'd never seen Bob Dylan before. This was at the Beacon, and I'm kind of ambivalent about him, which once again I know a lot of people would find horrifying. But yeah, it just doesn't speak to me in the same way as Hall and Oats does. And it was good, but it was so reverential. It was just kind of sitting there. There wasn't a hell of a lot of emotion happening. And afterwards, it just felt very blank to me. You know, it was like nothing. I understand that it was good, I guess, but I just didn't feel anything. And I think when you go to a show, I don't know, you want to come out of it like with like, wow. If you leave a show and you don't want to hear that music afterwards, then the show wasn't any good. And it's just like, oh, whatever. I remember like seeing The Cure for the first time. I was so blown away by the live show that all of a sudden I was like, oh, super Cure fan. Yeah. It's like, but not everybody kind of lives up to it. And Squeeze, and I'm going to say even Hall and Oats, like I've never seen a really transcendent Hall and Oats show, and I've seen them like 20 times. And I even got to see them from the front row at Irving Plaza. This is about 10 years ago when their fortunes were not as grand as they are now. Right. And it was still just okay. Yeah. You know, it's just like, and I in the thing I wrote, I kind of explained that scenario. But yeah, some bands are just not. I don't know. They're just they're albums, they're songs. They're not so much live things. Right. You know. So that's.
I've seen a lot of. I haven't seen a lot of shows lately. I mean, it's been a while. It's just my life doesn't take me to shows anymore. But I can't honestly remember. I went to Not a Surf maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Right. And that was great because I had met the lead singer. We'd interacted in the shop. There were some funny interactions with the staff and me and him, and you know the whole Alfred thing about us. You know, basically
they were making fun of you about being a super fan. Yeah.
So basically a couple of years ago, what happened was Matthew Cause, who's the lead singer of Not a Surf, and this is a band I've liked for a long time. That first video, Popular, I watched it the other day. I just love it. I love the music. I love the visual.
That's great.
And it's like at Bayonne High School. You know, they make no bones about it. It's like, you know. So he came in maybe 2 or 3 years ago to the shop to get some work done, and I wasn't there. And Andrew told me, he's like, you guess who came in the other day? And he told me, and I was like, wow, you think he'll come in again? You think he'll come back? And he did and I forget the interaction. And there was an interaction about potentially him buying a bike for his girlfriend and us like locking it up outside of his apartment as a surprise. And that didn't happen. But there were a couple other interactions that happened, and eventually we would talk, and when he came in, I'm a fan, and told him I have no problem telling him, hey, I really like your music. It really, really, there's some songs I like, and there's, some of the new stuff I really like. And, I would tell him, we would talk pretty frankly about that. And I think that, just being honest with someone about, hey, I really liked your music. And what was funny is that, Alfred would always say that he would come in and kind of get this like uplifting fan experience from me. And then he would leave and walk out, as he left the shop and walk outside, he'd, kind of clench his fist and be like, yeah, still got it.
Right.
Which is a total fictional account, but it was a very funny narrative thinking about, celebrity and thinking about, being in popular music and what that means to people when you interact with your fans at that level,
Right.
So I've always thought that was probably one of the funnier bits in the shop that when Alfred kind of, yeah, I still got it. Like, are you going to wear your Not a Shirt t-shirt today, Joe? You might come in, and like,
and just so you're aware, like, you're not alone. I know people who love Not a Shirt. I think there was a new record that just came out, actually.
Yeah,
but like, there's a lot of, they kind of surprised everybody because they were supposed to be a one-hit wonder, and then it turned out they were actually good. I mean, like, that doesn't happen.
For me, as I've gotten older, there aren't too many bands that you start with when you're 18 and you end with when you're 65. There aren't too many bands to go through life with in real time. And, not that they have been for me. There was a certain point in the mid-90s when I engaged with them, and they've been, as I've gotten older, I've been able to engage with them pretty directly, and in terms of like, their latest album came out and I listened to it and I like it. I like the old, so it's like it kind of is growing with me, which is rare to find that thing. And again, having that personal connection was kind of cool. We went to a show in Williamsburg a few years ago, and that was really it blew me away. I left there like, wow, there's a lot I don't know. And these people, those fans were insane. Like, there's a huge fan. It's like, wow, like, what am I missing? This is fantastic. And so that was cool. But what I've been kind of getting into, because at the new shop, I'm by myself essentially, and I have full reign of the music. Right, no one can stop me. In terms of the music that I'm playing. I
guess that means we're not. In case anybody's aware, one of the things I hated was hearing like the soundtrack of Alien, or I always use Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. All these ridiculous soundtracks. All the time.
Yeah, certainly there were certain musical preferences over the years, and it was. I mean, and, my music, as I was always put in my place a lot of times, where I think the one time Alfred got me again, which was always hilarious, was I think I had 2 Tickets to Paradise and Eddie Money on, and Alfred's like, that's one of the 5 pillars of Joe Rock. So he kind of made me really like look, you kind of like, when you kind of look internal, like, I do play that song a lot, and that is one of the songs I really like. But if anyone out there is listening, that song is great. And if you can hear it, there's this awesome bongo, a bongo like drum line throughout that whole song. It's just below the surface, and you got to listen to it. But once you hear it, you'll never not hear it. Again, 2 Tickets to Paradise, the bongo part, you're gonna love it. So that's how deep I got with that song. But so I've been, I'd stumble across songs here at the new shop, and one of the things I stumbled across recently, and we were talking about this earlier, was I got into Crowded House again. Started like down the path of like that first album, and when that first album came out in the spring of '87, I remember going to my junior prom, and thinking, and remember hearing that song either on the radio or maybe it was played in the dance hall, wherever it was. But I swear to God, and I remember it being hot and like getting dressed and going to the stupid prom and getting pictures taken with a woman whose name escapes me at this point. But I remember thinking like, and I was 17, I remember thinking like, these songs are going to be the songs that I'm going to remember. Like, I consciously remember standing in this driveway thinking about, was it Don't Dream It's Over, and being like, I bet you this is going to be a song I remember for years. And it was, and so I got more into looking at live stuff. I got more into, learning about like, the drummer who killed himself like 14 years ago, which was like news to me. And just finding a lot of getting into Neil Finn and kind of, his songwriting. And I know, you have some feelings about them too, but I just was like, there was something really special about that album, and about I found this footage of them playing at like MTV Summer Beach something or other,
Oh
and it was
God.
like it was in the rain on the beach. It looked
These
miserable.
poor bands, what they had to go
It
through
looked
on MTV
miserable.
Spring Break.
Yeah, it looked.
Yeah.
It was like the Jersey Shore, and like you can see in the background, like this like horrible like sky and the surf beating. It's all gray and rainy. And they went through the whole thing, and they were good sports, and they seemed like, as you watch them musically, there's three core members and a keyboardist who seem to rotate around. But the four of them
Right.
made some great music. The four of them, like the bass stuff was amazing. I mean, it's just like, I always look for bands that
Yeah,
can actually
yeah.
pull their sound off with just three or four people on stage. And they seem to do it.
Yeah.
And got into some of their later stuff, and you had turned me on to some more of their stuff. So
Yeah, they're another one, like it's also very underrated, and they got the Beatle thing thrown at them like straight away from the beginning. But the band before Crowded House that Neil Finn was in with his brother Tim Finn,
yeah,
Split Ends, were more of they were kind of eccentric, but they have some really beautiful songs. What I would tell anybody is like all you really need with that is the greatest hits, but
well, it started in the early
things
70s.
like I Got You and
the
One
early
Step
70s
Ahead
they
and
started. They started in the early 70s. I mean, they were like 72,
oh yeah,
73.
oh they've been kicking around forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's Crowded House, also good things, but then even beyond that, like there's Neil Finn solo, but there's also really good Tim Finn solo records. Tim Finn is Neil Finn's brother, who they were in Split Ends together. And then there's a thing called the Finn Brothers, where it's just the two of them. And so there's so much, there's a ton of music to discover. And I will say this, having seen Crowded House live a bunch of times during that span of years, they were always great. They were one of those bands where live, it really translated well.
Yeah.
And like you afterwards, you did want to listen, even if you were not into it before. I mean, they really... it's just really engaging. The songs sound really amazing that way.
He just seems like some people are gifted as songwriters, and it's impossible to keep it in. It's like he's gonna be producing great music till the day he dies. I mean, it just seems like there's some people that just cannot not write.
Oh yeah,
music,
he's just something in him. And of course now he's part of Fleetwood Mac, which I thought it was.
He's also
super cool.
I actually sent you an email that you didn't respond. I think he's his face is aging like Paul McCartney's. He kind of has that puppy dog, that droopy-eyed kind of puppy dog face.
Right. Yeah, once the eyebrows start changing color, they really start looking different. That's the thing with Paul, is like if his eyebrows were still the same color, now he looks like an old man, but he's not doing the hair dye really, which is sort of nice at this stage. But yeah, Neil, I forget, because like you're saying, he's been around since the mid 70s, right? Like, so that's a long ass time.
So I was hanging with my daughter, like I don't know what caused us to have this interaction in the living room near the TV, but every once in a while it'll happen. Normally she's in her room or doing whatever. And we just started watching videos. I pulled up YouTube, and I was asking her about I forget what I was asking her about, but we started watching videos on YouTube, and this is a thing. And my daughter's 15, and this is a thing that we'll do every once in a while. And it's kind of this way we connect.
Right.
And I'll put on videos of the Cure and the Smiths and New Order and things like that, and she won't like push back at all. She'll be like, whoa, she'll be really interested. And we get into like, I recently got into Oingo Boingo again, and she's like, what the heck? And she pronounced it, she's like, oingy, like she pronounced it really funny because she just didn't know those those letters don't make a normal word. And I was like, yeah, it's the guy that made the Simpsons song, and this is some cool stuff. And we listened to that. I showed her the B-52s. And this is a kid who's into, she's 15, she's an art student, and she's into, some of the K-pop stuff. So this was kind of like this way to get her like some backs. I was like, look, you're going to art school, you got to get a Cure t-shirt. Like, I mean, come on, you got to get the Cure t-shirt.
Oh, yeah, rite of passage.
So we listened to a lot of Cure, and she really, really liked it. What she, and we watched some Crowded House. I got her into some REM, and she absolutely loved the song and the video for What's the Frequency, Kenneth?
Oh, wow.
I thought that was the video is nuts. Like, the video is really, really cool. It's shot really interestingly. I'd forgotten about it. but something about like the absurdity of like what the song was about and the music.
Did you explain it to her? It's almost hard to
I kind of
explain now.
did, but
Even people who lived through it, I'm
yeah,
still not sure what the hell happened
I
there.
kind
But
of like some crazy guy went up to like was it Tom Brokaw and was like like screaming at him or something like that, or wasn't there some kind
right.
of
Oh yeah, it was Dan Rather. Yeah, it was
yeah
like two guys out in the street. Like one of them like knocked him down, and the other one said, "What's the frequency, Kenneth?" Like
yes
to him. She's like, imagine reporting like this is what happened. He's telling the cops. I was like, what?
yeah
It's just such a weird story.
I kind of got into, and it's like it gets as that story gets passed down from generation to generation. I'm sure it gets more distant to what it actually was, but I kind of just described it in real vague terms. But then we watched like Losing My Religion, which I hadn't seen in a long time, and that video is funny because like the whole band, besides Michael Stipe, is just standing in the background with their hands folded, in a weird kind of deferential way. And again, that video is kind of over the top and overly theatric and all kinds of things. But then we went and watched the David Letterman, like the first time they were on Letterman in like '82 when they played Radio Free Europe, and Michael Stipe, like when they interviewed the band, he like went and hid. So
that's a classic.
David Letterman wasn't talking with Mike Mill. It was just.
Did she? I mean, did it?
It's
do you think that she will spend time listening to this stuff on her own now without your supervision?
She made a playlist, and I heard her like she'll walk around the house with her phone like attached to her, attached to her hand as most of the kids do. But yeah, I've heard her listening to these things. I've heard her listening to these things on her own, which is great. It's
That's really awesome.
And I felt I felt me and her had this time, and of course, we make fun of her mom, my wife, because the joke in the house is like I'm the cool, it's like if mom likes it, it's not cool, and it never was cool. So we kind of use that as our way to kind of bond, bond musically about the cool parent and stuff. We're both not cool, but we play it off each other to kind of work with our daughter. But yeah, it was kind of fun, and like I saw. Like she has a Paul Simon album on her record player right now, and it's one where it has was it Small Town or Hometown? What's that goddamn?
Oh, song? My Little Town.
Yeah, whatever album that's on. And he's standing there with a Cuban like fedora hat on. It's like a black and white picture. He looks kind of sleazy. He has like a mustache.
Yeah, that's still crazy after all these years. I know that the cover of that record is hilarious.
Yeah, it was like I saw that out in her room. I'm like, what the fuck? Why are you listening to? Where'd you get this? But she's listening to that, and so it's interesting to see, as kids, and the distance between now and when that music was. I think about, hey, when I was 15, music from 30 years ago before that was like in the in the 40s, or the 50s or whatever the hell it was. So it's all it's all relative.
It's different. Well, there's no context anymore. Do you know what I mean? Right. It's like all kind of out there. And what I would say, I always feel really happy when younger people, kids and stuff, are listening to older music and maybe understanding that, hey, the artists that made this stuff, they were not that far from your age when they made it. I mean, these are, when you call it old people music or boomer music, whatever, it's like, I just think that stuff is, this kind of tags are so irrelevant. And I think too, like when you're young, not every kid in the world is into K-pop, like because when I was growing up, like all that stuff that the bullies and terrible kids in school liked, whether it was Yes or Journey or stuff, I didn't like any of that. I mean, I was definitely going the other way. I was more of a music head, but I was interested in who are T-Rex and, what are the Jam? I definitely gravitated in that direction. And I think there are a lot of kids that still go that way. You only ever hear about the popular stuff. It's like kids liking these very mainstream things, whether it's The Weeknd or Billie Eilish or whatever, although she's a bit of an outlier. But I think that there are all these kind of alternative weird kids who don't necessarily fall into that, just liking whatever everybody else likes.
I kind of like
Ariana Grande, and
I kind of was into in the '80s. I was just into kind of whatever Pink Floyd and what everyone else was kind of into, and like whatever was playing in the football locker room, which was always like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, or just all that. I had some stuff that I liked. I listened to Peter Gabriel. Was probably the thing that I kind of liked, was my own little thing that wasn't. This is before So came out, so.
So see, that was cool before So. Like if you were on board.
Right, I was on board. I was on board before So. But I remember, all the kids that would smoke outside behind the high school, they were listening to The Cure and the Smiths, and I never was interested in that kind of music until 35 and 40 years later. Like, oh God, that's what they were listening to. That's so awesome. I wish I would have known. I wish I wouldn't have judged. And I wish,
But
I didn't.
no, but you know what? It's like there's two things at work there. One of them is like when you're ready for a band or an artist, that's when you're ready for them. You can never force it,
Right.
And we've talked about this before. It's like I went through a whole generation, literally, of just not being into Joni Mitchell, not being into things. Steely Dan, I was like, oof, Neil Young. I didn't like Neil Young, right? But as I get older, I started to come around to it and appreciate it a whole lot more. And then all of a sudden, I was ready. All of a sudden, I loved all of it, right? So I think that there's a lot of that. And the other thing is, I know that the people when I was in school, like junior high, elementary school, whatever, like. The people who were mean to you, any bully people, whatever, the groups and things that they were interested in, just by default, you couldn't like them. That's why I always use the example of one of my more significant bullies who really liked Bad Company and Yes and stuff. And so I hated those bands just on principle because this scumbag liked them. And so years later, even when I was like, I heard that Bad Company have a song called Bad Company, right? So, and I remember listening to it going, I kind of like this. And I had gotten past all the childhood trauma enough to appreciate it. Yes, not so much. Yes, it's just like, but prog music for boys. I was like, oh. But a lot of these bands that had these negative associations, you kind of, you get beyond it. So, but that just goes back to like, when you're ready for a band, you're ready for them. And sometimes you just might not be. So when people say things like, I haven't really listened to whatever it is too much. And it's like, yeah, maybe you're not ready. Maybe it's just, when you're ready, you're ready. I know somebody who doesn't like David Bowie. And but that's okay. I mean, I think it's like a birth defect, but
someone who doesn't like Tom Petty?
No, all right. I know somebody who said I can't really get into him, but Tom Petty to me, yeah, it's like you always said, what kind of monster?
Yeah.
I know. It seems because he's transcended all the lines. You get why somebody might not like Bruce Springsteen, right? It's just so earnest and it just in your face and the cars and the girls and the shuffling around and the 4-hour shows. I understand.
Really quick. I heard a thing on I heard a thing on the radio the other day. I was in the car and it said that Bette Midler had done a version of Pink Cadillac that Bruce Springsteen KO'd and wouldn't let it be released because it was so terrible. And then the Pointer Sisters came out with their version.
Oh, it was Natalie Cole. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. But Bette Midler had a version that he KO'd and would not let it be released. Anyway, I digress. Tom Petty.
Yeah, I mean, and and the thing about Tom Petty too, and that falls into that. I mean, I liked him, but I didn't start loving him till years later when I saw him play, and then kind of like it was an absolute epiphany. I was like, wow. It just blew my mind how good it was.
Wow.
And he's somebody, like he was still making viable records in the 90s when people like Bruce and Dylan and stuff, no one gave a crap about them. It's just like he straddled that line between old school and I guess new school. But yeah, so I
old school and contemporary, I guess, right?
When people say it's like I don't like Tom Petty, that's even it doesn't make sense as a sentence. It doesn't work. Yeah. You don't like Tom Petty. Don't talk to me.
I sent you a preview of my little graphic novel project that I'm going off on, which is I'm doing a frame by frame Post-it note depiction of the Billy Joel song "Downeaster, Alexa," because every sentence and every lyric in my mind, I've like visualized what that looks like.
This is a legit comic, and for anybody who doesn't know, that song has a cult following.
And that song
people make fun of Billy Joel, and that one, talk about earnest. As Bruce writes about New Jersey, writing about Long Island in a romantic, poetic way, it's as somebody who grew up there, impossible.
And I kind of got back into that song over the summer. Remember we had like a playlist in the shop about like sea shanties or things about the sea, and Max uttered that song as I think he ironically liked it, and I was like, oh my god, I forgot all about that song. And we put it on, and it's on my playlist now that I hear all the time. But like the last line of that thing always gets me. It's like let's see, there ain't no island left for islanders like me, which he's just kind of speaking to this generation of not necessarily people working the sea, but just generationally, what things have changed and turned into. And I've always thought that line, much as I'm not an islander like you.
Oh, you can be in spirit. I'm going to invite you to be an honorary one if you want.
We're talking about this way of life that's gone, and talking about but every single line I've blocked out in my head about the comic that I want to draw, and I started a couple of them.
I got to tell you, I think you should keep going with this. I 100% approve of this, because it's just like, to me, when I saw it, I thought I was almost jealous. I was like, wow, that's such a great idea. Because that song, it's one of those songs people hate it and they love it at the same time. And I think Billy recognizes that. I'm sure that he mixes it up at his monthly shows at the Garden, and I know he occasionally, I believe he's throwing that one in there. But yeah, it's just perfect. And he wasn't being funny, it was being completely serious.
Yeah, I mean, he's not, and he put himself in the first person in that song, which is a little, but he's kind of personifying the ideal of this working class kind of fisherman type of thing. And but like the line about like he drives his ship further and further every year. So I've like made a map, and like there's an X where it says like 1993, and then in 1996 there's an X a little further away on the map, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. See, now that you're talking about this, everyone, you're committed to it, because like now it's gotta happen. And like I said, I think it's hilarious. I think that people would totally go for this in a big way. I mean, like I say, that's one of those songs I'm fascinated with, and maybe people are listening to this can chip in with these songs that weren't necessarily big hits, but that have sort of these religions build up around them in such a peculiar way. I mean, there's, I wish I could kind of reel one off the top of my head, like those deep cuts that just kind of become really meaningful
like I hate to say time. With Billy Joel again, but like Goodnight Saigon is another one that's like,
oh man,
it's not. I mean, it is a song that I'm sure he plays at shows, and all the veterans get up on the stage, and it's touching, but it's not like it's not like the top 20 of songs you're going to hear on the radio. Like it's not even in that top 20 of like songs you're going to hear on the radio. So and again, not to talk too much more about Billy Joel, but yeah, I mean, he's obviously written stuff that's touched us. So I mean, he knows.
Yeah, he was somebody who I think I've talked about on here. I resisted for a very long time. He was not remotely cool. My one high school friend. Now I was into I loved the Police, and I loved Genesis, right, at that time, and XTC and things like. I was really getting into all that cool British stuff, and so. But my friend was constantly trying to sell me on Billy Joel, and her big argument, and she thought he was hot, which is super peculiar, but her big argument, and this is from teenage girls, everybody, she's just like, you should really listen to him. He really understands women. And I remember thinking, does he? I was like, there's no way this guy's going to understand me better than Sting does. So, and so she insisted that we go see him. And seeing Billy Joel on Long Island is, of course, akin to seeing Bruce in Jersey, or the Red Hot Chili Peppers in Los Angeles. It's the same thing. It's like homecoming for everybody. And I went very cynically. And then it was during a Nylon Curtain tour, and he did that very song, Goodnight Saigon, and he had these veterans come up on stage, and I ended up crying. And this is like, I thought I never in a million years would have thought that I would be moved by Billy Joel in any way, right? Because to me it was too obvious. It was the kind of thing like all the people who didn't really like music liked. And he totally won me over. I was totally seduced by the sound of Billy Joel that very evening. I can mark it.
on MSG network, which I don't think we get anymore. It was a cable network. I just don't think we get it anymore. But they would always show, because the MSG network would just show Rangers games and stuff, but they had a lot of time to fill, so they would show these like movies, and they always showed. I think we talked about this before. I hate to say it. They always showed this footage, this concert footage of that was a Stormfront tour at Yankee Stadium, which was like 1991 maybe, or 92.
Yeah.
And the documentary is so awesome, and it's just more like a concert. It's not really a documentary; it's more of like just a concert, a movie of the concert essentially. But they're outside before the concert and interviewing all these unbelievably hilarious Billy Joel fans. It's very similar to the Rock and Roll Parking Lot, very similar. But
Right.
the
I should
Bronx
watch.
version, the Bronx with the
Yeah.
cops on the horses, like, "Hey, Billy Joel playing tonight, yo," and the fans. And then the show goes on, and Christy Brinkley was there, and she was like taking pictures as if she was like some kind of like photojournalist, and they had on stage, like, he had his band, and it was a big band, but there were a few people of color. You can tell he was like widening out some of the maybe some of the sounds that his normal band couldn't get, but there was like percussionists and like a cool violinist, and these were people that to a Long Island person looking at Billy Joel's band, like, oh my God, this is, what's going on? But it was like almost like a United Nations kind of band, very diverse. Maybe he was going for more.
That was the thing to do at the time.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
really like it was not about paring down. It was like more.
It's rhythm of the Saints,
Yeah.
Rhythm of the Saints, and it's Graceland. It's like these whole ensembles of more international sounds, so more diverse sounds.
Right. Yeah, and Billy was, and let's be frank, that he's beginning his decline at that stage, career-wise.
Yeah.
And making fewer records and all that kind of stuff. So he was, that was sort of the beginning of the end to some degree of his domination of pop music. But yeah, he's somebody who, and we talked about this as well. You had shown this to me on Slate.com, if anybody's interested. There's a really scathing, critical,
very long
essay about Billy Joel. This guy just hates Billy Joel. It's fascinating to me. It's fun to sometimes read somebody like spouting very vitriolic, nasty stuff about music. I don't know. It's kind of fun to read it, but it just takes a lot of energy to I guess build up that much hatred. This guy hates him, hates him. And but it's a kind of a funny read. Yeah. But if anything, it solidified my positive feelings towards Billy Joel after reading it. I was like, you know what? Not that bad.
It was like, I think it came out 4 or 5 years ago, and it's long, and it's very well done, and you're right. I mean, I always thought, like, it takes so much effort to hold a grudge, just as a human in general.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of effort to stay angry at someone, and it must take a lot of effort to write such a long piece about how much you hate something so much. It's like,
it was so fevered. Yeah. And the other thing is, before I started writing the Hall and Oats thing, generally speaking, I don't like to look around to see what other people have written, because I don't care. Right. It's not, it's nothing to do with me. And I did read a really short piece by a guy who, it was on one of the major, websites, about how Hall and Oats are lame. It's not even the Emperor's New Clothes. They don't say anything in any of the songs, which is such a weak argument, because in any song, no one says anything. Right. I mean, there's not one piece of music in the world that really says something. But it was just, the argument was like super weak. And that's when I started to realize, like, everyone's got their own sort of prejudices and things. And some of them are Hall and Oats. I always look at it as music for it's a music for everybody, but it's essentially music for girls. And, so I felt some of this guy's vitriol in the article was directed that way. The Billy Joel one, he gets into more depth about why he hates things. He calls out certain songs and stuff. Yeah. But I think it's just too easy. Billy Joel's too easy a target, and Billy Joel seems to have a sense of humor about all of it too. It's not, you're not hurting him, and at this stage, and
he's just like laughing at his mansion, like, yeah, that's hilarious. Like,
right. It's like doing another verse of Piano Man. It's just like, ugh.
It seems like he does seem like he has a good. I think there was a time when he was miffed that he wasn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think there was like a little undercurrent of that, and then he was writing classical music and wanted to be appreciated for that a little bit. But I think that once all the dust settles, I mean, I think seems very comfortable in his skin. But who am I to say?
Right. Yeah, he's just he was just too pop to be taken as seriously as, say, like a Bruce.
Right.
You know, he just wasn't as romantic a figure, and you know, Bruce was like this, you know, hot guy, and
Right.
Billy was just Billy.
Shrub.
So there were, yeah, and Long Island, you know, doesn't as a cultural birthplace doesn't really have a lot of water.
Right.
No pun intended. So it's just, yeah. But he's somebody who I don't know. I actually respect him. I love that he does those garden shows every month, and like he's kind of hasn't gone super Vegas. He's still very much this East Coast guy.
I saw this.
Kind of,
maybe it was a show about or something about like the ideas or the you know the residency and how they put on all those shows and just like the logistics behind it. And they went through, like the tour manager went through like how they pick the songs for the set list. And he said basically there's 3 categories of songs. Like there are, you know, songs that rotate through. There are, you know, kind of like the main classics. And then he's like, then there's like the songs you have to play or you're going to get run out of town. You know, like Piano Man. Like there 3, so they built their set list around, you know, kind of working those 3 different like levels of songs in, which is I thought was interesting. But so hey, we're going to have to end it. And so the big takeaway from this whole podcast is you got to check out this Hall and Oats story that's coming out tomorrow. This article, this piece, Picking Up Rocks, is the blog.
.com, yeah.
The
title of the piece is I'll tell everybody now. It's called Man Eater. Man Eater, grading Hall and Oats, a love story. So it's basically just break down the albums, but other stuff too. And yeah, I hope everybody likes it.
And this is Bicep Radio. You can get it on iTunes and Spotify and SoundCloud and Google Music and all these things, and we're gonna get back into doing these regularly because they're so enjoyable, and I love talking to Hope about music and listening to stories about music with Hope.
Yeah, this is awesome. I hope everybody stuck with us till the end.
All right, well, thanks once again, and we will be back at you soon. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.